Tag TV and Tag Radio be seen and heard by both technology users and technology producers throughout the state of Georgia and around the world. Low cost, big benefits, powerhouse online branded video and audio has arrived. Tag TV, Tag Radio, there's a lot more to know. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. The challenge matched the opportunity. Start a private equity company that creates the right software tools for healthcare providers to enhance decision-making. You'd have to start off with sophisticated financial analytics. Then you'd have to add capability to enhance collaboration, capture the right information, and then communicate with non-financial audiences. The vision would have to recognize that healthcare organization decision-making requires both trade-offs between financial objectives and the broader strategic objectives that consider the long-term mission of the organization. The development team surely would have to have a background in healthcare administration, financial consulting, and software development with a specialized expertise in decision analytics and operations research. The idea would, set new standards for the decision-making tools in the healthcare industry. Greetings, everyone. It's Friday, February 10th, 2012, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. The power of such a new approach would surely be a game changer, and so it was, as Strata Decision Technology released its first commercial software in 1997. Today, across the country, healthcare organizations, community hospitals, major academic medical centers, and some of the largest and most influential healthcare systems in the United States all use this unique set of evolving products that even today continue to set new standards for decision-making tools in the healthcare industry. Up to the Tech Talk, private equity banking and backed companies, and the role of the CFO in supporting rapid organic growth, as Tino speaks with Todd B. Boney, Senior Vice President and CFO for Strata Decision Technology. With nearly 20 years of leveraged banking expertise with names like First Chicago, Citicorp, and KeyCorp, Todd specialized in middle market leverage financing and growth financing. In 1999, he joined a private equity-backed client as CFO and helped transform that company from a single facility into a multinational organization. In 2005, Todd again joined a private equity-backed organization and transformed that company into an international HR SaaS company, integrating 8 companies acquired in 3 years. It's a rare opportunity to speak with an insider and have a candid conversation on just how do CFOs contribute to strategies for rapid organic growth. What's the key to international expansion and more? The Tech Talk focus turns to private equity-backed companies and the role of CFO as Tino explores banking, business, and private equity-backed companies with Strata Decision Technology's Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, Todd B. Boney.
Todd, thanks for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Hi, Tino. Good to talk to you. Glad to be here for your audience. Thank you.
Let's jump right in terms of your background. So you've had a career in private equity, both from the banking side and also in the CFO side. But now you've chosen to focus more on private equity-backed companies as a CFO. So talk a little bit about that, why you chose that direction.
Sure. I originally started out in the banking space, working with private equity-backed companies all the way from multinational-based companies down to middle market-based companies. Had done that for about 15 years and actually had a client that I've been working with for about 5 years. He had a very interesting platform he was working on in the Indiana marketplace, asked me to join him as a CFO, and it gave me an opportunity to go from being an advisor, putting deals together, to actually implementing operating plans.
And so in terms of the differences in those two, I mean, you sound like you're following the same sort of trend, though. What kind of things do you enjoy in this post that you weren't doing in the other?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is, I went from being fundamentally a salesperson to being a CFO. If you think about it, when I was calling on private equity firms, my money wasn't any greener than anybody else's. So I had to differentiate my product offering. I had to learn how to develop relationships as a way to really compete in the marketplace. I had a lot of time to work with a lot of different types of firms, and what I really found, was more interesting was working with middle market companies, and in particular growth-oriented companies. The reason for that is that, in a middle market orientation, I'm much closer to what's going on in the operations. In some of the companies I've worked with in the past, CFO is oftentimes working in more of a corporate role. And quite frankly, I actually enjoy working more in closer to the operations, getting involved as much as I can in the day-to-day operating side of the business. And in a private equity situation, the demands for organic growth are always very high. The expectations are high. In each of the companies I've worked with up until this company, which I've only been here 6 months, the companies have grown rapidly through acquisition as well as through organic growth. The first two businesses I worked with as CFO, we took from a single facility or multiple facility locations based solely here in the U.S., and through a series of acquisitions, expanded the footprint here in the U.S., and also added international operations. So you can imagine the dynamic that creates. When we talk about bringing companies together through an acquisition, you talk about cultural differences. Well, when you bring companies together in an acquisition involving foreign operations, you have a different element of culture. And, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting working in the LBO space, and in particular working with the private equity space, is that you get all of these elements: rapid growth, organic growth, acquisitions. You have, quite frankly, a significant expectation in terms of growth. And you've got, quite frankly, some very intelligent people you work with. I'm not going to say that private equity has a corner on it. You would have the same thing with venture-backed companies. But, the sophistication you have, the resources you have available at the board really make it very interesting. And, I'm a big believer that you never stop learning. And the only way you're going to keep learning is if you're working in an environment, working in a room where you've got people more intelligent around you.
Well, for us laymen that aren't directly in the market, we hear a lot about the financial situation today versus 3 years ago. And I guess looking back and then looking forward, how's it different today being in this field than it would have been, say, 3 to 5 years ago? And what are your expectations, moving ahead?
Well, I think if you look at it really from two different levels, there's, the one thing that, I think a lot of people lose sight of because so much of the discussion right now is around, what's going on from a tax standpoint,
right?
The so-called carried interest debate. But, what I like to do is to tell people that you need to remember that the private equity business is a business. And, they're in the business of raising money. They're in the business of investing in companies, and it's no different, for me on the operating side. If we don't have a successful product offering, we're not going to grow our business. We're not going to grow revenue. We're not going to keep customers. And that's, in a sense, the same thing. It's just thinking about it as in a different way with the private equity community. I guess their customers are their investors, and their product, to the extent that you want to call it that, is really their ability to demonstrate how they can compete differently, so that it doesn't just come down to a question of, paying a higher price and maybe being luckier over time, layering on more financial leveraging. It's that they've got a different way of competing in the marketplace, a different understanding of what's going on in the industry, or a different way of working with the management teams they put together. So I think that theme continues to be there. I think the industry's obviously faced its challenges over the past couple of years with changes in leverage. And I think the other thing that's going on is that all of the things that affect, me and the business I'm doing here, the globalization as well as commoditization, affect what the companies, the private equity community is looking at investing in their portfolio companies. So I think what they really bring is, especially the ones that are successful, is they actually bring an industry perspective to bear rather than just a financial perspective. And, in the 15 years that I've done this on, this side of the table as the CFO, And, the roughly 20 years I did it on the other side of the table. I'm really dating myself here for your listeners. But, the game originally, I think, in my view, started out as really one of financial engineering. And I think it's really gone past that these are investors that, definitely have a particular investment thesis in mind and actually bring perspective and expertise to bear. And, if you look at the company that I'm with now and the company I was with previously, one of the things that we were trying to do and, get a lot of input from our board on is how we changed the revenue model from one of a software model that wasn't traditional software where you were selling licensed software up front, but it was really software as a service that originally started out in varying degrees of different activity-based pricing, or in the case of the business I'm with right now, more of a traditional license model. And so how do we make the transition from that license model or activity-based model to one that is more operating in the cloud-based environment with software as a service or subscription-based pricing? And, that's not easy to accomplish from an internal standpoint with your salespeople. It's not also easy to accomplish, quite frankly, from a cash flow standpoint. If you're working in a legacy software model where you get paid a lot of money up front from your customers, but you've sold off the intellectual property through a license, and you're relying upon new product development to bring the customers back for additional purchases, you at least have the cash up front. Now, if you convert to a subscription-based model, the challenge is how do you make that transition from having a lot of cash up front to now getting cash over time? And, having the capital available from a private equity group, but also, and probably more importantly, having the board there as a sounding board to make that transition, I found is really critical.
Now, you've done some business both in Atlanta, and you're still doing some here and in Chicago, and then also, I know, as CFO for two companies, you went from domestic to international businesses, and I want to talk to you a little about, what the strategic considerations were for that move. But first, just from a standpoint of the regions, do you find much difference in terms of business that you see in the Illinois and Chicago area versus what's going on in Atlanta, or is it pretty similar?
Actually, it reminds me, quite frankly, of where I think Atlanta was probably 5 to 10 years ago. The technology community here in Illinois, and in particular in Chicago, is definitely getting organized. And that may be something that you're actually seeing as well, Tino. But I think it's a different challenge, here in the Chicago area for the technology community than I think we probably would see in the Atlanta community. I don't sense right now that there's the same degree of industry focus, that the investment community and maybe even the government organizations have around particular industries, at least in the software space. So I think, that they're probably, I'm guessing 5 to 7 years behind where Atlanta was, when I first entered the Atlanta marketplace about 10 years ago. And, I think a large part of it comes down to, what TAG has been able to do over the years, what you've been able to contribute, Tino, and quite frankly, what, all of the members and your listeners have been able to contribute.
Well, I appreciate that. It's good to be positioned. I spent 10 years in Chicago, so a little bit ahead of our friends in Illinois. I think your assessment there is correct. They have not focused on technology as much as Atlanta, at least in terms of the ecosystem or organizing. But I know they're gearing up, and there's the Illinois Technology Council that does our counterpart there, and they do a nice job. So shifting, though, from just going back to you and the businesses that you've been in and involved with, that had some domestic focus, but you've also moved towards some international focus. And what's the reason for that, and what kinds of things do you look at as a CFO to make those sorts of decisions?
In the last software company I was with down in Atlanta, the mission, the objective was different than the first company I was with, which was a specialty materials business. In the last company, it was really about controlling our distribution in the UK market and the Australia market. Those are the two markets that we chose to enter first. We had distributors. In the UK marketplace, our distributor was acquired by one of our competitors, so our hand was forced. In the Australian marketplace, it really got down to a question of, one, wanting to control our own distribution, but also, quite frankly, in both markets, trying to find a way to grow the market, as we continue to grow in the States, and I don't think we were anywhere near the saturation point. But we realized we would ultimately reach that point. We were starting to do business with more and more global companies, so having some degree of local presence was also helpful. But quite frankly, it also got down, Tino, to an economic question. When you're sharing, the revenue stream with a client, whatever the split is, whether you call it a royalty rate or some type of reseller fee, quite frankly, there was never enough in it for the local distributor, and there was never enough in it for us to be able to do any of the things that we needed to do in order to be competitive, to differentiate ourselves in the local marketplace. So, quite frankly, it was one of those situations where the only way we were going to be able to justify it is if we had all of the return vesting to our benefit as the creator of the intellectual property or the origination of the relationship. We just didn't think we could get there by having to share it with a local resource. Now, the problem with that is that you obviously have to have a team locally that you feel comfortable with, because despite the fact that they speak the same language we do, the cultures are different. Australia is too far away to run on a centralized basis. If that would be your philosophy, that was not our philosophy. So you have to have a local team that you have to be able to communicate effectively with. You really have to appreciate that the markets are different locally. One of the things we saw in the Australian marketplace, we actually did more business in Australia than we did in the UK. But one of the challenges with the Australian marketplace is it isn't as large as the US or the UK markets, and therefore the industry behaves differently. You would see less specialization from providers. You would see more providers trying to provide a broader suite of services, or product, in order to be able to, generate sufficient return from the investment they were making with those clients. So in the case of the last software company, that was the objective. In the case of the first company I was with, this specialty materials company, it really got down to globalization. The company that I first joined had a very vibrant business here in the States. We began to realize that with what was going on in China, that we needed to do something. We had some very unique capabilities in China that we were trying to leverage. We also saw an opportunity with the consolidation going on worldwide to be able to help influence the way in which the industry was consolidating. And we felt that we would be in a better position to control that consolidation if we actually had a local footprint. So, literally in a 1-month period, a year after I joined the company, we went from being the single facility company in the Indiana marketplace to being a multinational. It was like instant multinational. You had a drop of water and poof, you're there. And, we ended up picking up operations in Europe and in Asia. And that gave us that capability to, become the true global multinational company that allowed us to leverage the unique capabilities and characteristics of each of the individual businesses that probably each of them individually wouldn't have the bandwidth nor the capability to focus on.
Well, Todd, we're out of time, but I do appreciate you joining me on Tech Talk today, and congratulations on your career, and look forward to hearing more from you as we move forward. So thanks for joining me.
Okay, thank you, Tino. I appreciate it. Take care.